Page 119. Also, don't forget your handout on the Constitutional Convention. A lot of important information in there you gotta know. We're gonna look in the book, we're gonna look at this handout. Let's get into this. We are at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. What year is it? No.
1787.
1787. 1787. And of course, yesterday we met some of the key leaders, people that are there. We said that today we're going to talk about some of the big arguments and how they settle them with compromises. Nobody's gonna get what they want. They're all gonna have to give a little bit, meet somewhere in the middle. We're gonna get to that. But let's review yesterday. There were some things that they agreed on too. They don't have to argue about these things. They agreed early on they're not gonna fix the Articles of Confederation. They're not gonna do that. Too difficult. Instead, they're gonna start over and write a whole new system of government. All right, another thing they agree on is that this is gonna be a secret meeting. That's so they're free to express their ideas. All right, can't get in trouble, can't get made fun of, because any idea could be a good one. Everything's on the table. Third thing they agree on is what type of government we're going to have. There's no argument in this. They all agree what kind of government did they want to build, and what kind of government do we have? What kind of government is your country? Cassidy? It's a republic. Now somebody tell me what that means. Don't read to me. Tell me in your words, what is a republic? Hannah?
So it's when like people like us pick like representatives for us, like to represent like our state, and they go up and go with a bunch of other people who got represented by their state.
Yeah, it's elected representatives, just regular people like us. All right, my next question about a republic. Obviously, those people are going to have some power. Tell me about their power. Jessica?
It's limited by written law.
Yeah, their power is limited by what the law says, written law. That's called rule of law. We are a nation of laws, right? And obviously, the ultimate law is the Constitution. That limits people's powers, our leaders. There's things they can do, there's things they can't do. They don't have unlimited power, and that's the beauty of a republic. All right, they agreed on that. Now, let's get into these arguments that they have. They don't agree on everything. They're gonna have some very difficult arguments, and the only way to solve them is gonna be with compromises. That's why the Constitution is referred to as a bundle of compromises, which is probably why it works so good. Nobody got everything they wanted. Before we get into the arguments though, early in the year, that summer, 1787, when they were having all these arguments, one day the elder statesman spoke up. Who am I talking about? Benjamin Franklin. And remember, his voice is barely a whisper. And when he starts talking, all the arguments stop, they all get quiet. They strain to hear what he has to say because they respect him so much. And he starts talking about a Bible verse that says, reminds us, if a sparrow, you know, a little bird, if a sparrow can't fall to the ground without God noticing that, then how do we expect to build a great country, write up a whole new system of government without God's help? In other words, he's suggesting, hey, every day we argue. Hey, who are the guys in this room? They're leaders, right? From back in their home state. These guys are used to getting their way. I don't say that because they're spoiled. I say that because they're brilliant and they usually can convince other people that their way is the right way. They're used to getting their way, but nobody's going to get their way. And that's why they're arguing so much. And Ben Franklin says, here we are. We believe, Declaration of Independence says we believe this, that God wants people to live free. And we're trying to set up a government to ensure that freedom, and we haven't even asked for God's input? Kind of foolish, isn't it? So they all agreed. They said, you know what, from now on, each morning, let's start with a prayer. Let's ask for God's guidance. All right? We want this to go the way God wants it to go. Well, they did that. Once they started doing that, don't get me wrong, the arguments didn't stop. They still had very heated arguments, but they made progress. They knew when it was okay to compromise. And it must have worked, right? Because we're still using it. And just so you know, that tradition, we're still doing it today. To this very day, in 2020, every session of Congress is opened with a prayer. A tradition started in 1787 at the suggestion of Ben Franklin. All right, so that's the first argument they come to, and this is a whopper. This almost ended it all. When we're talking about the Congress, we're talking about the people who make the laws. So when we're talking about the Congress for the central government, the U.S. government, remember we talked about that yesterday. We're not talking about laws just for New York State or just for North Carolina State or whatever, but the laws that the central government, Congress, would make, that all the states have to follow. All the Americans have to follow those laws, right? The ones that the central government makes, here's the big question. How do we know how many representatives each state is going to get to send to the U.S. Congress, the people who make the laws for the whole country? Again, how many representatives should each state get to send there? Well, a delegate from Virginia stood up, and we call this idea the Virginia Plan. And since Virginia in those days was the most populated state, we call it the large state plan. Large as in population, not in landmass. The large state plan or the Virginia plan. This guy says, well, I think that the states with a greater population should get more representatives to the Congress because they're making laws that every American has to follow, and if you have more Americans, you should have more say in the laws that the Americans have to follow. More people means more say. Greater population, more representatives. That's the Virginia plan, large state plan. Some good sense to that. Then the guy from New Jersey stands up and says, no, 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 that is not fair at all. We call this the New Jersey plan, also called the small state plan. Again, not small in mass, but small in population. Nowadays, New Jersey's populated, but then it was a small state. And he says that is not fair at all. That's a crazy plan. Every state should have equal representation to Congress. Every state should have the same amount of say. What's the name of our country? The United States of America. A state is a state is a state. Why should one state have more say in the laws that every state has to follow? They'll just be bullies and pass laws that us small states don't like. Every state should have equal representation. That seems to make sense too, doesn't it? And then the large states are like, no, no, no. More people, more say. Base it on population. Small states, no, no. Equal say for every state. Oh yeah? Yeah. Well, that does it. I'm packing up, I'm going home. If that happens, if this meeting ends, you know what that means, right? That means there's no Constitution. That means we're still stuck using what? Articles of Confederation, which we already know is too weak of a government. And it's only a matter of time. I mean, it won't happen that day, might not happen that year, but sooner or later, somebody will take away our freedom. And no one will have freedom. Fortunately, somebody saved the day. A man named Roger Sherman stands up. Hold on. In your textbook, page 121, Roger Sherman is profiled, tells his story. Interesting fact about Roger Sherman, I think this is pretty cool. He was there on July 4th in 1776, and if you look at the Declaration of Independence, his signature's on there. All right? He was there when they wrote the Articles of Confederation, our first try at governing our country. He signed that. We already know he's at this meeting. He signs the Constitution. He signed the Declaration of Independence, the Articles of Confederation, and the Constitution. Pretty cool. One of our great founding fathers. Not the most famous one, but this is a huge moment right here. He's going to save the Republic right away. He stands up, and where is he from, by the way? He's from but usually we call it the Great Compromise. Great like in awesome, good idea, saved everything from failure. This is a great idea. Roger Sherman says, everybody simmer down. Big states, small states, settle down. I got an idea. I think we can solve this. All right, let's hear it. He says, I think we should have a bicameral Congress. Huh? Oh, check your hand out. What does bicameral mean? Riley?
Two houses.
Two houses. Congress, of course, the group, the people making the laws. We should have a bicameral Congress. Cameral, I think, is a Latin word that means house. Bi means two, like a bicycle has two wheels. Bicameral Congress, two houses. Says, here's my idea. We will have an upper house, and we'll call that the United States Senate. And in the Senate, every state will have equal representation. Every state will get 2 senators. Big states get 2 senators, small states get 2 senators. Who do you think liked that part of the plan?
Connecticut.
New Jersey.
They want equal representation in the Senate. Who liked that part of the plan?
Small states.
I think the small states did, right? That's exactly what they wanted. The New Jersey delegates and the other small states, they're like, yeah, round of applause for Roger Sherman. You tell him, Roger, good idea. He's like, shut up. I said bicameral, 2 houses, I'm not done. Oh, won't tell him about the other house. The other house is the lower house, and he said we're gonna call that the United States House of Representatives. And in that one, we're gonna decide each state gets a number of representatives based on what?
Population.
The population of their state. And of course, Virginia and the other large states liked that part of the plan. Did either side get what they wanted? No. I mean, the large states like the House of Representatives part, but they don't like the Senate part that much. The small states, they like the Senate part, but they don't like the House of Representatives part that much. But both of them kinda got what they wanted, but not completely, so they're like, yeah, well, okay, I can live with that. It's a compromise. The Great Compromise. And here's the amazing thing about it. Obviously, we're still using it today, in 2020. In our central government, which is now in Washington, D.C., our Congress, the people who make the laws for all the states and all Americans, meet in that big building up on Capitol Hill with a big dome on top called the Capitol Building. Well, guess what? There's 2 sides to that building. One side is the Senate, the other side is the House of Representatives. Now, you have enough information to answer this question. Today, in 2020, how many senators are there in the United States Senate? Christian? How many senators are in the United States Senate? Today, 2020. I didn't think you were paying attention. I don't know what you're thinking about over there. Help poor boy, Hannah.
100.
100, where do you get 100?
So there's 50 states, and Senate is equal representation, and you multiply that by 2.
Every state gets 2. We have 50 states, so there is 100 US senators in 2020, right? By the way, how many are from Florida?
2.
Yeah, 2. Can anybody name them? Anybody know who our senators are? They represent you when they make laws for all of America.
Is Rick Scott one of them?
Rick Scott is one of them. He used to be our governor. And in 2018, his governor term ran out, and he decided, you know what? I'd like to be one of the 2 guys that goes to Washington and helps make US law, and I'll represent the people of Florida, and we elected him. Representative government. Rick Scott is one of them. Who's the other one? Seth?
Marco Rubio?
It is Marco Rubio. All right, those are our 2 senators. Good job, you guys. All right. So let's figure this out. Nowadays, the most populated state isn't Virginia anymore. Now it's California. By far, they have the largest population. How many senators do they have? 2, right? Florida has 2. California has 2. I always like to use Wyoming as an example, because I've been to Wyoming a couple times. I kinda like it out there, except it's too cold or else I'd live there. It's too cold, but I remember one day, I was driving through Montana for like a whole day with just my family. I never saw another living soul the whole day. There ain't nobody there. Now they got cities, you know, Cheyenne, Laramie, and Casper, but most of Wyoming is just a wide open wilderness. Several times I stopped my car and got out and looked around. It's just at the beauty of nature, and I like Wyoming because I don't like people. Just kidding. All right, so I love Wyoming. Wide open spaces, nature, except it's too cold, so I came back to Florida, where's warm. Now let me ask you, how many senators does Wyoming get? 2. California, Florida, Wyoming, doesn't matter. That's what we mean, equal representation, right? Every state gets 2 senators. All right, we're still using the Great Compromise, which means we do have a House of Representatives, that's the other side of the Capitol building. Now, there's no way you could know this from the information you've learned. You might just know it, but from the information you've learned, you couldn't figure this out, so I'll tell you, there are 435 House members. Been that way for a long time. We're not gonna change it. It's 435.
Most states get out of it.
Now, how do we know how many congressmen to the House of Representatives each state gets? What's it based on?
Population.
Yeah, the population. Just so happens that Florida, we have a pretty good population. We have 27 of those 435 are from Florida. California, the most populated state, they have 53. That's almost twice as many as us. Wyoming, you know how many they have? 1. Every state has to get at least 1, right? Everybody gets their say in America. No taxation without representation, so everybody gets a say. So we guarantee that every state gets at least 1 representative, and based on the population, Wyoming gets 1. So how weird is that? Wyoming has 2 senators and 1 member of the House. California has 2 senators and 53 members of the House. Because that one is based on population, right? That's the Great Compromise, and we're still using it today. Any questions on the Great Compromise? Whose idea? Roger Sherman. He saved the meeting from ending and dooming us to the Articles of Confederation and loss of freedom. All right, so the next obvious thing we gotta figure out is, well, if we need to know the population so we can figure out how many representatives they get in the House, well then what are we gonna need to do? We're gonna need to count the people of every state. Time to count noses, right? Well, what's that called? There's a word for that. Check your hand out. What's that called? That's the census. The very first census was in 1790. The second one was in 1800. The third one was in 1810. We do the census every, how often? 10 years. Which means 2020 is a census year. We're in the middle of figuring out that right now. How many people live in Florida? How many live in Wyoming? How many live in South Dakota? Every state, we have to do the census. Why do we need to know that? So we know how many representatives out of those 435 get to go to the House from each of the 50 states. And it could change. Right now, the 435 doesn't change. That stays the same. Where those people come from can change every time we do a census. For example, before 2010, Florida had 25 representatives. But after the 2010 census, because our population grew, we got up to 27, which means there's states somewhere that lost some seats, right? That's the way it works. 435 doesn't change. We just shift them around based on the new census numbers. Obviously, every state has to always get at least 1, right? But the other numbers can shift. So we don't know the results of the whole census in 2020 yet. Next year, 2021, we'll sort it all out, and then we'll reapportion redistribute those 435, and probably Florida will get more, because we are the fastest growing state in population and is not even close. Usually what happens is, well, what's happening like crazy is people that live in states that have high taxes, that would be like New York, California, Illinois, all those states have one thing in common: they're completely controlled by Democrats, and Democrats like high taxes. I'm not sure why the people elected those Democrats, but then once they do, they don't like paying the taxes, so they leave and they go to states that are run by Republicans and that have low taxes, like Florida and Texas, plus we also have great weather, alright? And they come to here, and Florida's the biggest growing state, so after 2020, census information comes out, New York, Illinois, who knows where else, they're probably gonna have a couple of less. States like Florida and Texas will probably have a couple of more. The 435 doesn't change, but we'll sort all that out once we get all the figures in.
I just have two questions with it. So when the census comes out, do they take people from like, someone could be like from California and then move to Florida because they got more people added, or population group?
I understand, yeah, I mean, if your population grows by a certain amount, you'll get more.
So someone could be a representative of California and then move to Florida because their population group?
Oh, you're talking about the representative themselves?
Yeah.
No, if you were elected to represent the people of California, and you move out of California, you gotta give up that seat. You have to live in the state you're gonna represent.
So when someone's population grows, they kick people out to make more room?
No, we kick people out in the next election. See, every 2 years, we have an election for the 435 seats, every 2 years. So in 2022, we're gonna elect 435, but maybe we'll have to say 29 from Florida.
So on the ballot it shrinks.
Yes.
Alright, and if a new state gets added, do they like expand the 435 or they?
No, we redistribute.
Okay.
Or Congress could expand it, but we haven't done that in a long time. But they always could. All right, and again, we'll get into the details of Congress and how it works when we get to the Constitution. Right now, we're just learning the basics. You're asking detailed questions, which I like, but we'll have plenty of time for that. All right. Now we got that one settled. Whew, big sigh of relief. We can continue on with the conference, the convention. Now they run into another problem. You're gonna love this one. On the surface, this one seems ridiculous, but let's finish it first. And then we'll see it's not so ridiculous as it sounds. The next problem is, see, not all states were the same. Some states depended on slave labor. Usually southern states, because of their large plantations, growing cash crops, slavery was legal, right? They had lots of them. Most of the time in the northern states, very little or no slavery. Let's call those free states, right? Now here's where the next argument comes in. Hey, we gotta know the population of the state, don't we? Why? So we know how many representatives to send to Congress. But we needed to know the population of a state for another reason. This is a new idea, so listen. To see how much tax your state has to pay. Because it does make sense. If you have more people, that means you have more people working, which means your state is generating more wealth, which means your state should have to pay more taxes. All right, everybody agree on that. Here's where the problem comes in. It's now time to count people in your state. Here's what the slave states were suggesting. Well, when it comes to counting population, we want to count every single person, including the slaves, so we can get more representatives in the House. They want to have a high population so they get a lot of say when it comes to making laws. But those same states, the slave states, said, when it comes to count our population for how much tax we pay, well, we're only going to count the white people. We're not going to count slaves. Now they want a low population, don't they? Because then they won't have to pay much taxes. Does that sound fair to you? On the one hand, they want to count the slaves so they have a lot of say in the House. On the other hand, they don't want to count the slaves because they don't want to pay much taxes. And the people from the free states are like, what? That makes zero sense. If anything, you got it backwards. You should not count the slaves when it comes to figuring out how many representatives you get. Let me ask you something, southern states. The slaves have any say in your state? No, they didn't, did they? If they don't have any say, then why should you count them in your population to get your state more say? And when it comes to paying taxes, do the slaves work? Yeah, the slaves work. They are generating the wealth for your state. They don't get any of it, but they're creating the wealth. So you should count the slaves when it comes to determine how much tax you owe. Think the slave states like that plan? No? Oh yeah? Yeah. Well, that does it. I'm out of here. I quit. Going home. Well, if that happens, then we're not gonna have a constitution, which means we're stuck under the Articles of Confederation, which means we're all doomed. We're all gonna lose our freedom. Because that government's just too weak. We need compromise, don't we? We need to give a little bit. So the compromise, and here's the part where you're gonna think this sounds ridiculous. And on first glance, it does seem ridiculous, but it's not so ridiculous. Our founding fathers get a lot of criticism, even today, by ignorant Americans when it comes to this. We call this the 3/5 compromise, and it goes like this. We're gonna count the slaves for both purposes, determining how many representatives we get, and for determining how much taxes the state has to pay. Every slave gets counted as 3/5 of a person. Again, that sounds ridiculous, right? First glance, I feel like face palming. Look, either they're a person or they're not a person, but no one can be 3/5 of a person. That's just ridiculous. Well, it's more went like this. Like here, this part of the room, these 2 rows, there's 5 people. Let's say you're all slaves. We would count like this: 1, 2, 3, and stop. The next 5, 1, 2, that's 6, and stop. 6 out of 10, and so on. So they counted 3 out of every 5 slaves, 3/5, whatever you want to say. And then the slave states are like, well, guess I can live with that, because at least we're counting 3 out of 5 slaves, so our population numbers go up a little bit, so we get lots of say in the House of Representatives. But on the other hand, we don't have to count all 5 slaves, so we don't have to pay as much tax from our state. I guess I can live with that. It's a compromise. Now let me ask you, sitting here in our classroom, it seems to me that these guys are missing an obvious issue here. Maybe, I don't know, are they missing this? I mean, instead of arguing on how to count slaves, maybe what should they have realized? What?
Slavery's bad.
Yeah, they shouldn't have slaves. That doesn't even live up to the Declaration of Independence that they only wrote 11 years earlier, that says we have these truths that we believe to be the truth, and we don't even have to prove it, they're so obviously true, and all men are created equal. Well, slavery is one person owning another. That's not equal. So it seems like this room is a room full of idiots. Instead of arguing on how to count slaves, don't they realize we shouldn't even have slavery? It doesn't even live up to the ideals of the founding document, the Declaration of Independence. And then some Americans today, again I call them ignorant Americans, say there's a room full of racists. Well, neither one is necessarily true. Here's what they understood. There's a lot of men in this room that are saying, yeah, we know slavery is wrong. It doesn't even live up to the ideals that we said we believe all men are created equal. But there's also people in this room who are not about to give up slavery because the southern state's economy depends on that. So if we want to dig in our heels and be stubborn and say we are not going to approve of any government that keeps slavery legal, we will not compromise. Would there have been a constitution? No, because there were also men in that room who were going to be determined to dig in their heels and not give that up. So if both sides would have just dig in their heels, guess what? We don't have a constitution. which means we're stuck under the Articles of Confederation, which we know is too weak of a government, and who would have lost their freedom? Not only everyone in that room, but everyone in America. We would all have been somebody's slaves, sooner or later. Maybe not that day, maybe not that year, but sooner or later, somebody would have taken over. So these are not a bunch of idiots. They're very wise. They know, yeah, we're not living up to the ideals of the Declaration of Independence. We will fix that. Someday, we will have to have that argument and get that settled. But in the meantime, we're in a crisis. We have got to set up a new system of government. We've got to get this Constitution passed to save the Republic, and then we can fight that battle another day. We'll fix that some other time. Did we? Yeah. It was generations later, but we finally fixed that problem. So they were wise men. Otherwise, we would have all lost our freedom. 3/5 compromise, on the surface, sounds really, really stupid. But when you understand why they did it, it was a very wise compromise. At least for the time being. Plus, I like to point this out too. It's so easy for us to sit here in 2020 and think we're so much better people than those racists back then. We could look at them and say, you made it legal for one person to own another person? What were you thinking, you racist? Yeah, you know what I say to that? Here's what I think the Founding Fathers would say if they could look at America today. They would look at all of us and say, wait, what is legal in America today? You made it legal to kill babies as long as you do it before they're born? What is wrong with you people? We're calling them racist, they'd be calling us monsters. We look at them and say, you thought it was okay for one person to run, what were you thinking? I think they would look at us and say, you're killing babies? What are you thinking? Oh. See, guess what we're not doing now? We're not living up to the ideals of our Declaration of Independence, where we say, we believe, we only think it has to be proven, it's self-evident. Not only are all men created equal, but God gave them a right that nobody has any business taking away, the right to life. The very first one on the list. Our Founding Fathers, if they were to say that to us, they'd have a point, wouldn't they? When we look at them and say, why did you legalize slavery? We have a point, because that doesn't live up to the Declaration of Independence. If they would criticize us today, they would have a point, because we're not living up to the Declaration of Independence. My point is, our country's not perfect. It's not now. It wasn't then. Probably never will be. Why? Because it's made up of people, and people aren't perfect. But that doesn't change the fact of history that still, the Constitution is the best system of government ever devised by man to guarantee freedom. We're not always living up to those ideals, and we need to fix it. At one point, one generation of Americans fixed the evil of slavery, didn't they? How about the evil of abortion? Some generation of American has to fix that evil so we can live up to the Declaration of Independence. You know who that might be? That should be your generation. Why not? Somebody has to do it, because we're not living up to our own ideals. After all, what are the very first 3 words of this Constitution they're writing? It's we the people. We write the next chapter in history. Right? We're who determines it. Terrorists don't determine it. Right? We determine what's going to happen next. So maybe we need to get busy and write that evil, instead of sitting here and judging our Founding Fathers for their evil. We got one right in front of our eyes, and we're rioting in the streets trying to solve a problem that's already solved. Right? We don't have slavery. We have equality. There's a bigger problem we're not solving. We're killing innocent Americans. And we want to fight a battle that's already been won? What a waste of time and energy. Let's fight the battle that needs to be won. All right, let's keep going. We got the Great Compromise. We got the 3/5 Compromise. When's Constitution Day? Check that good old handout. Christians awake. What is it, Christians?
September 17th, 1787.
September 17th. You might remember last week I mentioned it, right? Hey guys, it's Constitution Day. Y'all look at me like, huh? because you didn't know much about the Constitution. Now you're learning. You know a little bit more. Now it means a little more to you. I think that's what's going on here. They're signing it, right? One by one. It's probably September 17th. I want you to look at this. Chair. Up there on the platform. The one that's up there by George, probably when he needed to rest, that's where he sat. That's one of those things I told you in Independence Hall today is still there. One of the original pieces of furniture. Pretty cool, right? I'll show you a close-up. There's that same chair. It's still there today. I've seen it in person. Alright, and when you look at it, it's kind of like a half of a sun, like a weird creepy face on it or whatever. Alright, well, at the end of that summer, the elder statesman, Ben Franklin, started talking again. Everybody listened. He said, you know, I've been looking at that chair all summer. I've been trying to figure out whether that was a rising sun or a setting sun. And now that we've written this Constitution, I've come to the conclusion it is indeed a rising sun. What do you think he meant by that? Riley?
Because with it rising, it's like metaphorically the start of a new day, so this is like the start of a new chapter in the history of America, making the Constitution.
Perfect. Well said. I mean, obviously the sun rises in the morning, the whole day's still ahead, right? It sets in the evening when the day is done. So he's using the chair as a symbol of our young country, and with all the arguments they were having, he was afraid throughout the summer that it was a setting sun, that this experiment in freedom called the United States was about to end in failure. But now that we wrote the Constitution, he's thinking we nailed it. Made a government strong enough to defend our freedom, but not strong enough to take it. It's a rising sun. The best is yet to come. America has a great future ahead of it. Was he right? Yeah, here we are over 2 centuries later, still using that same Constitution. Which leads us to the obvious question. Now in 2020, if we look at this chair, symbolizing our country, is it a rising sun still, or is it now a setting sun? I don't know, when you look at the news in 2020, it's easy to get alarmed and say, well, man, I think it's about it, man. That's the end of America, setting sun. But I'm not that pessimistic. I'm more optimistic. I think we still have a rising sun. I think the best is yet to come. We're having rough days. We've had rough times in our history before. We'll get through it. We've got to be optimistic, because who's it up to? Whether it's rising or setting, who's it up to? Is it up to the terrorists? No, who's it up to? It's up to us. First 3 words of this thing they just wrote. We the people get to write the next chapters. So my point is, if America ends, it's not going to be because of an outside enemy. Our government's too strong for that. It's not going to be because of a tyrant in our own government, because we're a republic and the law limits their power. It's going to be because of we the people. We didn't do what it takes to defend our freedom from an outside enemy, or we didn't do what it takes to hold our leaders accountable and not let them abuse their power. It's all up to us. So if America ever ends, we won't be able to blame someone else. It'll be the fault of we the people. That's the beauty of the Constitution. And I think it's still a rising sun. I think we'll rise to the occasion, if you will. All right, let's keep going on our handout. If you check page 124 in your book and on your handout, it mentions the Electoral College. Once you graduate from high school, maybe you should apply to the Electoral College, see if you get admitted. No, that's not an institute. You can't go to the Electoral College, can you? It's not a place, it's not a school. It's a system. And as you can see in your handout there, it's a system, a very unique system that we use to elect only one office, the President of the United States. We don't use the Electoral College system for any other election except the President. And it's very unique, it's fascinating. And especially in 2020, being a presidential election year in 39 days, by the time we get to November 3rd, you will already be a constitutional scholar. You will know everything there is to know about the Electoral College, and you'll thoroughly understand it. We'll get into the details of it when we get to that part of the Constitution. But for now, all you need to know is the Electoral College is a system we use to elect the president. We'll get into the details later. All right, then on page, well, looks like 123, and in your handout, you'll see Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Glance at that, I'll explain it. Once this meeting is over, and all these delegates take the long trip home to their home state, I like to think it went down something like this. You get back to New Hampshire, back to North Carolina, wherever. Can't you just see them riding into town and all the people of their home state saying, hey, you're back, man, you've been gone a long time. Did you do it? Did you do it? Did you fix the Articles of Confederation? And what are they gonna have to say?
Nothing.
No, we didn't do that. People of their home state are like, wait, that's what we sent you to do? Where have you been also? What have you been doing, golfing? We sent you to fix our government. And they'd have to say, no, we wrote up a whole new system of government. You did what? We wrote a whole new system of government, but calm down. It's not like it takes effect yet. We're still using the Articles of Confederation, but just read it. Just read it, give it a chance. It's called the Constitution. If you like it, we'll ratify it. What does that word mean? Check your handout. Ratify means to formally approve. In other words, once the people of all the 13 states approve of the Constitution, it will be ratified. In other words, it kicks in, and we'll start using that system of government, and then we can get rid of the Articles of Confederation once and for all. So just read it, give it a chance. And then we'll talk about it, we'll vote on it, we'll see if we can approve this thing, ratify it, start using it. And now it's time for an argument. Not just the men in the room, now it's time for a nationwide argument. And we had one. The whole country was arguing. Some people like the Constitution, and what do we call them? The Federalists. They think the Constitution is the perfect system of government to guarantee our freedom. Some of those Federalists wrote a bunch of essays called the Federalist Papers. These are written by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, the father of the Constitution, and John Jay. And every single day in history, there's thousands of people reading those Federalist Papers even still today, especially law school students. All right, so any future lawyers, trust me, you will read the Federalist Papers. What they are is an explanation to the people in those days and nowadays of why the Constitution is so awesome, why we need to support it, why it will work. It's trying to convince the people who oppose the Constitution to be Federalists. What do we call people who are opposed to it? Riley?
Anti-Federalists.
Anti-Federalists. Alright, so the Federalist Papers are trying to convince the Anti-Federalists to support the Constitution. The Anti-Federalists, and by the way, one of those was somebody you know, Patrick Henry from Virginia, was an outspoken Anti-Federalist. And here was their argument. They said, no, you went too far. The Constitution set up a government too powerful. We understand, we agree with you, the Articles of Confederation was too weak of a government, but you've gone too far in the other direction. You've set up a government under the Constitution that gives way too much power to the government. We're afraid the government's going to become a tyrant and take away our freedom. So the argument goes back and forth, the argument rages. Finally, it kind of ends like this. The Federalists say to the Anti-Federalists, all right, Anti-Federalists, what can we do? Is that us?
Yeah.
That's too bad. We gotta go.